Good evening, everyone. Let me say that again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Reverend Jeffrey Brown, and I'm here to welcome you to one of many public hearings around Boston 2024. And we're excited that you're here in the great place of Roxbury. Can I get an amen on that one? And the wonderful Yawkey Center here at the Boys and Girls Club. We want to thank them for opening the doors and allowing us to have this particular hearing. A few days ago, I was in Arizona giving testimony with the President's 21st Century Policing Commission. And as I was walking downtown in Arizona, I had on my Red Sox hat, the one that has the world champion decal on the side. I thought, it might be a little dangerous since downtown is right where the Arizona Cardinals stadium is, and I thought I might run into some folks who may have a different opinion about what I had on. But I found a pizza place and I sat down, and there was someone who was maybe 4 tables away from me, decided to move to the table next to me. And he looks at me and he says, "Nice hat." And I said, "Well, thank you." I said, "This is the Red Sox." And he said, "Yes." He says, and he says, "I'm from Boston." I'm like, "You're kidding me." And then we're having this conversation about the Red Sox and, of course, about the New England Patriots and our recent Super Bowl win. And then he said, "Well, I'm not really from Boston, but I'm from Andover." And so we started to talk about how no matter where you are in the region, when you're outside of Massachusetts, you always say you're from Boston. Boston is a great city. And it was interesting how sport sort of brought this man and myself together in a way where we had a kinship and an eventual brief friendship, talking about the way in which we're able to connect together around sport. And for me, Boston 2024 is an illustration of that interaction. It is an event that is going to bring communities together. No matter whether you're from Roxbury or from Hyde Park, whether you're from Southie or from Brighton, or whether you're from Andover or down at the South Shore or even Springfield, when this game comes, we will all be together. We will all be Boston. And an amazing thing about the coming together of the games is that I'm always excited when the Summer Olympics comes, because it's really about the world coming together from different countries and from different ethnicities. The power of sport brings together and melts all of that to a common pot of Olympic excellence. And the excitement for me around that for Boston is that it plays into the vision of what I'd like to see Boston become. We're coming to our 400th anniversary as a city, and we are a city that needs to come together in a more powerful way. I think that this event that is in the future can also speak to the future of our city, so that when the world comes together, the whole world will be comfortable in our city, because we will be reflective of what the world is in this Olympic sport. And so as we talk to you about Boston 2024, it's my hope that you will see that vision as we see that vision. And as we have this conversation, that our visions can come together so that we can be one Boston for 2024. At this point, I'm going to introduce Erin Murphy. Can you put your hands together?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Brown. It's always a daunting task following Reverend Brown in a public setting. I just want to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is Erin Murphy, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Boston 2024, and I'm very, very excited to see you all here tonight. I promise not to take up too much of your time, but wanted to cover a few housekeeping things. And first of all, wanted to thank you all for signing up to be part of our Citizens Advisory Group. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, folks who were at our first meeting, and I also see a lot of new faces. So we're really, really happy you're here, and you're very, very welcome. We want to hear your input, your ideas, your questions, and your concerns as Boston 2024 develops our bid and shapes our plan over the next 2.5 years. So your involvement is extremely important. I also want to acknowledge some special people in the room. Suffolk County Sheriff Tompkins, thank you very much for being here. And Paralympian Joe Walsh, thank you very much for being here as well. I would also like to welcome our audience watching this on live stream, thanks to our new partnership with WCVB Channel 5. As I said, tonight we very much want to hear from you. We've structured the discussion tonight to have a brief update presentation from our team, which you'll hear from in just a moment, and then plenty of time for questions and answers. Each of you have been given a blue card. We ask that you use this card, A, to tell us how you like to be involved, and in addition, each blue card has a number written in the top right corner that represents your Q&A group number. When we begin Q&A, we will call a group in numerical order. If you would like to ask a question, please line up at the microphone when your group number is called, similar to the process for boarding a plane. You are not required to ask a question by any means, but if you would like to, we welcome it, so please do so during your assigned group number. If you did not receive a blue card, a member of our team will get one to you. We've also handed out to you questions we received in our first Citizens Advisory Group meeting and answers to each, along with illustrations and maps from our presentation. In our first Citizens Advisory Group meeting, you were very vocal and very helpful. As you see behind me, our first meeting elicited 120 fantastic questions, each of which we have posted answers for online. The key themes of those questions were transparency, venues, budget, transportation, and legacy for the city of Boston and the people who live here. We are listening, and you will hear from our team tonight about each of these important issues. And in our future meetings, we will be responding to what we hear tonight from you. You may have heard that we just announced 20 public meetings in 20 weeks in Boston and across the state. We want to give everyone an opportunity to shape our plan. So let's get started. Our presenters tonight include John Fish, chairman of Boston 2024, and one of the most civically engaged people I have ever met in my life. In addition to his day job, John has worked tirelessly to make a difference in the lives of urban youth through the Boston Scholar Athletes Program, which has 4,000 Boston school kids excelling in school and in sports in order to ensure a college education and a brighter future. David Manfredi, founding principal of Elkus Manfredi Architects and renowned champion of the protection of urban spaces in Boston and throughout the world. Everything he designs is through the lens of sustainability and environmental preservation. And Rich Davey, CEO of Boston 2024. Rich's track record in leading organizations that are critical to the people of Massachusetts and doing so in an open, honest, and transparent manner is unrivaled, most recently as the head of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. Without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage the chairman of Boston 2024, John Fish.
Thank you, Erin. I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It really is a pleasure. As Erin mentioned, my name is John Fish, and I'm the chairman of Boston 2024, and very, very proud to be involved in this pursuit of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Tonight, we are going to have an open and hopefully very candid conversation about hosting these games, and I would think the discussion is going to revolve around the economic benefits, but I also would argue the social benefits, as the Reverend has pointed out. As we've been sort of going on a tour of speaking about the impact of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, I think sometimes people always run to the dollars and cents first, which I sort of appreciate are very, very important. But I also think the discussion of the social impact of what these games can potentially do to our community should be at the forefront of the conversations as well. And I say that to you as a perfect example of that myself. And Reverend talked about the power of sport and the impact that sport can have on a community. And I'm an individual that unfortunately had a learning difference growing up and still do. I'm a severe dyslexic. And I didn't really start to read and write until I got into the high school time period of my life. And I was very, very fortunate to meet a coach who helped me quite substantially and provided me with the confidence and support to believe in myself. And I did that on the athletic field. And once I was able to do a commendable job on the athletic field, I was able to take those skills, those attributes that I learned on the field into the classroom. And prior to that, I didn't have that strength. I didn't have that courage. And so to me, the idea of speaking about sport from an economic perspective is absolutely paramount. But we can't lose sight of the fact of the power that sport has in our community, how it impacts the younger generation in such a positive way. We talk about this particular building here, the Boys Club and Girls Club, that we've been involved in for probably about 15 years. Our office is right down the street. And seeing the impact that the teachers and the counselors have on these young children, teaching them sport, nutrition, and all the other different conversations that sort of grow out of the conversation of team. It's very, very powerful. So I can't express to you how proud I am to be involved in the pursuit of the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And we ask this evening for your support and your counsel on us moving forward for the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I want to thank you very much and now introduce my very close friend and architect of the 2024 Games, Paralympic Games, David Manfredi. David.
Good evening, and thank you, John. I'm going to be much briefer tonight than all of you have seen us in past settings, so we spend more time with questions and answers. I just wanted to review our basic planning principles, and this really pertains to what we have done to date, which is that first phase, which is what we call proof of concept, which is really about feasibility. And there's really four things, and I just want to explain them a little bit. One is environmental, fiscal, and social responsibility, sustainability. And that really is connected to the IOC's Agenda 2020. If you read that 2020 agenda, it is all about sustainability in its most comprehensive aspects. And what it means is no white elephants. If there is not an end user for a venue, we won't build a permanent venue. We'll build a temporary venue. The Olympics in the past have built some beautiful buildings that stand today without permanent users. That won't happen in Boston. We'll build temporary venues, or we'll partner with the universities to build permanent venues where there are permanent users. What we also mean about sustainability, is that there have been a number of intrusions in the urban fabric over the last 50 years. The rail did it, the interstate highway system did it. And now there's an opportunity, and the Olympics can be the catalyst, to repair some of those ruptures in the urban fabric. And it means that there's an opportunity to bring neighborhoods together, to make better connections. And that's what we mean by kind of environmental sustainability. Second principle is walkability. We've talked about this a lot. We've talked about accessibility, public transit, talked about distances between venues, about how 26 of 33 venues are within about a 3-mile walk to either the MBTA or to public transit. That's really key to the games because it goes to how you manage people, how you manage traffic, and really can give a character to the games that is really very special. Third is legacy, and the legacy value for Boston and for the entire Boston region. And I think we probably should explain, we use the word legacy a lot, and what does legacy mean? It's really very simple. How do the Olympics in Boston make the city better in the year 2030. It's really as simple as that. And the strategies have to do with housing, they have to do with accelerated infrastructure improvements, they have to do with reinvestment in our parks and public spaces, but it really is, how is the city better after the Olympics than it was before the Olympics? And then lastly is leveraging existing venues. And what we mean by that is simple. It's really about partnering with our universities. And you've seen the plan. It's partnering with BC, BU, Harvard, MIT, the UMass system, especially UMass Boston and UMass Lowell, Northeastern. They all are important contributors. And in fact, the games aren't possible without those kinds of partnerships. So what you've all seen to date is what we've called proof of concept. And all that means is that these plans are still very much in the development phase. We've already received a lot of feedback from all sorts of folks, like the folks here tonight. The plan will change. The plan will evolve. We've studied plans over the last 20 or 30 years of summer games. And if you look at initial plans and then you look at what was built, if you look at initial plans in Tokyo and what is being built in Tokyo now, there's up to 40%, 50% change in the venue planning from the time the original proposals were made until the venues are built out. We expect the same thing to happen here. These sessions have been very informative. We'll continue to learn. We'll continue to evolve and develop the plan. And I think the plan will get better for all of that kind of engagement. Everybody's seen this. I think everybody's seen this big overall plan. And so I'm not going to go through it in detail again. I simply want to reiterate a couple of key points, and that is the plan and the venue planning is largely based on university campuses and land controlled by public agencies. There is no singular Olympic park, the way there was in London, the way there has been in lots of different Olympic Games. The games and the venues are being planned around existing transit, existing infrastructure, and future infrastructure. If you overlay venues onto the planning of the infrastructure that's either under construction, existing, under construction, or planned in the next 10 years, it all becomes apparent. What we're really trying to do is make walkable games and make plans that contribute to the future of the city of Boston. I'm just going to tonight highlight three of the most important, in many ways the most impactful venues, both in terms of the games and in terms of the legacy. You have heard us talk about the Olympic Stadium at Woodette Circle. Woodette Circle is right along West 4th Street, connecting the South End and South Boston. We think this is the best site, not only in Boston, not only in the region, but in New England for a temporary 60,000 person stadium. Why? Because of the connection to public transit. It is immediately adjacent to both Andrews Station and Broadway Station, and within a mile of South Station, which is the key hub of all transit in all of New England, but certainly in Boston. But secondly, there's a legacy strategy here, and that is that this can become the platform for redevelopment of a part of the city that is close in, that is well served by transit, and that is clearly underdeveloped. It's being used for a tow lot. It's being used for salt sheds. Not that we don't need salt sheds. It's being used for the public works garage. Those are important public things that have to happen in the city. But we can find other places. And we can propose here the building of new housing, significant density of new housing that is truly transit-oriented, and the transit already exists. And so there really is a tangible, a real kind of legacy plan. The second key venue I want to talk about tonight is the Olympic Village. And I think everybody knows that we've proposed the Olympic Village at Columbia Point, adjacent to UMass Boston. And again, the reasons for that are simple. Number one, it's adjacent to UMass Boston and their playing fields. It's adjacent to BC High and their playing fields. It's adjacent to Moakley Park, which provides more available open space. But More important, it fits with UMass's plans for development of student housing, and it can be a catalyst for a whole series of significant improvements, not only at UMass Boston, but traffic improvements, transit improvements at JFK Station. So again, we have tried very hard to think in every key venue, in every venue, in fact, not only does it benefit Olympic Games, but how does it benefit the city of Boston in 2030? And then the last one is Franklin Park, and we haven't talked a lot about Franklin Park in these public hearings, and I just want to talk about it a little bit tonight. We have proposed two Olympic venues there. One is the equestrian, and one is the modern pentathlon. The equestrian is made up of two parts, and the part that would impact most of Franklin Park, which is the golf course, is equestrian cross country. It's a one-day event. It would be planned, a course would be planned that does not interfere or in any way create havoc on the fairways or the greens of the golf course. But more importantly, it too can be the reason, the cause to reinvest in that golf course. It's a great civic amenity. Franklin Park's a great civic amenity for the entire city, but certainly for that adjacent neighborhood. But it can use reinvestment. And so the plan is, or the proposal is, to lay that out for that one-day event and then reinvest in that golf course. The second part is up here at White Stadium. And we've actually, with John, have studied White Stadium over a number of years and thought about different improvements that might happen here, long before thinking about the 2024 Olympics. What we're proposing for the Olympics is the modern pentathlon, and for our people versed in all Olympic things, modern pentathlon is made up of 5 different events. The goal here is White Stadium can be renovated, can be rebuilt, and in addition to the stadium itself, which can house those events, we would add a pool, one of the events of the pentathlon, which would be a permanent feature and a community benefit, meaning a permanent community pool for that neighborhood, as well as another building which would be both a athletic kind of athletic field house as well as classroom building sponsored by Boston Scholar athletes. So the goal there is use the park, which is a great park, and reinvest in the park, and reinvest in the park in ways that it has true legacy that goes well beyond 2024 and really becomes a benefit to the neighborhood, to the youth of the city, to public sports and recreation, to health and wellness of our youth. That's what the Olympics are all about, and that's how we're thinking about planning individual venues. So I'm happy to answer all questions, and when we come back to that, let me introduce Rich Davey.
Thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. And I'm going to spend a couple more minutes on some slides, and then we're going to get to questions. But I think one thing we've learned in our public session so far is to anticipate a number of questions that have come up. And so rather than waiting for them, we thought we would get right into them. So the first is the games budget. A lot of conversation and questions about what the games will cost, how we're going to pay for those, and what exactly we're paying for. So first is a parlance you'll hear, the OCOG budget, which basically means what it takes to operate the games in Boston. So it's temporary venues, it's games operation, everything from feeding the athletes, for example, to moving them around as they need to get around the city. We expect that to cost $4.7 billion, which will be funded from sponsorships, TV revenues, and ticket sales. We have taken those numbers from experience in other games, including most recently London. Because the United States would be hosting an Olympic Games, we feel extremely confident that we can meet the revenue in those buckets, in particular for TV revenue. As I think many folks know, NBC is the partner with the International Olympic Committee through 2028, and they are enthusiastic about the potential for a Games in the United States. The other is the so-called non-OCOG budget, which means what? It means the things that would be temporary or repurposed once the Olympics went away. So the Olympic Village, as we've talked about, first using that as an Olympic Village to host the athletes, as David said, over at UMass Boston, and then repurposing those facilities either for dormitory uses that UMass wishes and workforce housing that can be both there and potentially modular housing that we could put in other parts of the city of Boston. International Broadcast Center down in South Boston, an Olympic Stadium site, which is David already mentioned, we are currently talking about putting in the so-called Midtown area. And then security, something that we've been very clear about, costing probably around $1 billion. Since 9/11 in particular, the federal government has been responsible for large event security, such as the Super Bowl, such as political conventions, and such as the Olympics. And we've been very clear that we need our federal partners to help us here because we don't have the money, nor do we have the expertise. We expect dozens of heads of state to be in Boston, and so that the Secret Service and our federal partners would be the ones to help us and to pay for that. So totaling, again, about $9 billion. Transportation plan, something I could talk about all night. It would bore you to death, so I won't. There's been, again, some myths around the transportation plan, and I just want to clarify a few things. First, the reason why, or one of the reasons why, the United States Olympic Committee selected not other cities, but Boston to represent the United States is because of the investment we have all made in our city and state over the last 2 decades. The Central Artery Project, Logan's expansion, and cleaning of the Boston Harbor, one of the cleanest urban harbors in the United States. Folks, if we didn't invest in ourselves over the last 2 decades in those projects, we would not be standing before you today. The transportation plan for the Olympics assumes several important things that are not only priorities for the Olympics, but priorities for all of us, citizens of this region. Certainly, given the challenges the T has had, if you didn't think the T needed new red and orange line cars, I hope you're convinced now. We were convinced, and that, as you know, is underway. The T has already signed a contract to replace the entire orange line fleet and to replace 2/3 of the red line fleet well before the Olympic Games would occur. The planned expansion of South Station, not necessary to host the Games, but something we believe is important for the region and certainly would help enhance the Games in themselves. The extension of the Green Line to Somerville and Medford, something that the federal government committed $1 billion to just last month, and something that has been under construction for the last 2 years. And then also a proposal to bring rail service down to the Boston Convention Center in South Boston to improve traffic there. Again, things that are not required to run the Games, but certainly that would enhance our ability to have not only good Games for those 4 weeks, but more importantly, things that will benefit our city and region, frankly, whether we win the Games or not. Some folks have also asked, Olympics and other cities have had trouble. They have had trouble staying on time, staying on budget. What would you do at Boston 2024 to ensure that? Well, there's a few things we would do. First, the rigorous planning that we're doing now. We're being very transparent, having lots of conversations across the state and the city, listening to the communities to make sure that we are planning appropriately. Spending now time with the United States Olympic Committee. They have sent in experts who have venue planned over 9 and 10 Olympics to help us think about how to deliver this in the most cost-effective way. Disciplined and innovative private sector project management, what does all that mean? It means a few things. It means penalties and incentives to keep people on time. You're looking at a fellow who closed the Callahan Tunnel for 2 months. A lot of people told me I was crazy to do that. But with penalties and incentives, we were able to open that tunnel on time. We shut down I-93 in the summer of 2012, over 14 weekends. We did that on time and on budget. There are ways to effectively manage large construction projects in this city. The Boston Harbor cleanup is a perfect example, a $2 or $3 billion project that was on time and on budget over a decade ago. Olympic Agenda 2020, this is what the International Olympic Committee recently put out and told cities, you know what, we want you to be more sustainable. We don't want you to build those white elephants, as was mentioned. We want you to use existing facilities. And that is the crux of our proposal. As David said, we want to use our colleges and our universities and, frankly, other facilities to host teams before the event, during the event, and thereafter. And then an insurance program, something that Chicago, while they didn't win the 2016 bid several years ago, proposed in an innovative way. That's something we are looking at to ensure that we are backstopping the city and backstopping any risks that could occur. One other thing we want to mention is that for some of the challenges some of the games have had around the world, the United States has been extremely successful in its hosting of the games, not only hosting the games, but also doing it in a financially responsible way. And folks, the last 3 games, 1984, 1996, and 2002, all turned a profit. And what happened to that money? In Los Angeles in particular, John and I had a chance to visit Los Angeles 84 last week. For 31 years, Los Angeles has a foundation that's put over $250 million back into youth programs and education in and around the Los Angeles area. It still is doing that today. Salt Lake City returned dollars back to the city and to the state of Utah, and also to some of the colleges and universities as well. And then the economic benefits, well documented, whether it was excellent tourism in London, whether it was job, both temporary and permanent creation in the cities around the United States, the ability, for example, to turn over housing to Georgia Tech in Atlanta. These are the kinds of things that we are thinking about. Certainly some folks have gotten it wrong, but in the United States we've gotten it right. And we believe we can duplicate that success with which I said, rigorous planning and making sure that there are uses for the facilities we build, and then using those facilities that currently exist. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Erin Murphy, some information on how we get involved, and we want to hear your comments and questions. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and we have plenty of time for Q&A. And so as I said at the beginning of the program, for folks who have the number 1 and 2 in the corner of their card who would like to ask a question, there's a microphone in the middle of the room. Feel free to come on up. Hello.
I've lived in the Boston area for 40 years, living in the South End for 15. I'm here to plead that you give up the Boston Common. It seems so out of keeping with all the other very creative things that you've said here tonight. The Common and the Public Garden, which according to what I have, 3 different events are going to take over half the Common and a quarter of the Public Garden are going to be fenced off. They're not in need of redevelopment. They're not dirt. They're not concrete. You're not going to take down that temporary stadium and build something else. They are parks with trees and grass. Trees and grass are fragile. Lots of people and certainly buildings for several months over a vast swath of that is going to have a very detrimental impact. I know you say that you're going to restore everything, but that takes a long time and is not easy. I've spent 35 years of my professional life looking after historic landscapes and parks, and they're not like buildings. Second point is that's Boston's oldest, it's the nation's oldest open space. It's our most important part. It's where people by the tens of thousands every day stream through. If you're going to close it off with a fence over half of it for several months, both before and after, I think that's not a good idea. We have to remember the Olympics are not free. You have to pay a lot of money to go to events in the Olympics. So the public is going to be kept outside that fence. And thirdly, it's the center of our city. Many of us are going to have to continue to work and get around and shop and visit places. And if all of this activity is taking place right in this very congested area, I think there's going to be serious problems. I think many of the other venues make enormous sense, and I just plead, let's give up the common and the public garden. Thank you.
You make 3 excellent points, and I think, John, you can address those.
We have heard that before in a couple of other meetings. We are taking that into serious consideration. Each particular venue that we're sort of dealing with right now, we have a backup option to it. In some particular circumstance, we have 2 or 3 different options. As we've mentioned early on, and I don't think we used the concept tonight, a lot of the venues that we've been working with are sort of proof of concept. Are they, as a city, in the community, in the Commonwealth, feasible to host these games? So we do have alternatives, and we haven't finalized sort of our approach to the volleyball on the common, but I just want to thank you for your concerns. We do appreciate them. We definitely will take them under advisement.
Thank you. With your experience and background, we're really very happy that you're here as well. Thank you.
Hi, Karen Websick from Jamaica Plain. This is very premature, and I haven't thought it out very well, but we will have, when we get the Olympics, we will have world-class athletes here. It would be wonderful if those of the athletes who are willing to do so will come and speak to youth or do something. So I'm hoping that's on your future radar screen.
It's a great point, and actually, you actually reminded me that there's another Olympian in the room, Nicole Friedman, who I neglected to mention at the beginning of this program. We're very happy to have her with us tonight, and I think that Rich can address that question as well.
Okay, great points. It's something we've thought about not only during the Olympics, but before. As pointed out, not only do we have 2 former Olympians and Paralympians here in the room, but one of the heartwarming things I've found in this job is there's a family of Olympians in this town who are really enthusiastic, and frankly, I don't think we use enough. And so our hope is that perhaps we create kind of a speakers bureau, and to have the Olympians out in schools, at Wise, like where we are tonight, Boys and Girls Clubs, et cetera, that kids can really be inspired. I mean, John told a very personal story. I think there are a lot of Olympians who can tell personal stories about what sport meant to them, perseverance, what they learned. So it's a great point and one we will do.
Thank you.
Good evening, committee.
Hello.
I'd like to start off with saying that, all tides lift boats. Should I say rising tides lift boats? And I heard somebody talk about sports up there earlier. But in terms of economic tide lifting all boats, being a native Bostonian, born and bred here, Roxbury resident, and over the course of the years, I've been more or less attended some big events that we've had in the city. In terms like the NCAAs, you got the Bean Pot, everybody knows, so I'm not going to hold anybody up that we got to get to the games tonight. In terms of where I live at, my part of the community, maybe all the way stretching up to Mattapan. And like I said again, we've had big events. Economically, a lot of them things do not trickle towards our way. We don't actually feel it. And there are things that have been happening in terms of, we have had the baseball all-star game, but looking on where I live at. So my question to you guys is, what would the results of this 2024 coming here, and basically, I know the dynamics of my community is changing, but in terms of would our community be able to benefit, and not trying to have any divide or anything like that going on here, but in terms of what happens in terms of our community. And I know you have the game plan, and like I said again, I'm quite sure taxpayer dollars will be involved any way you cut it. We do have taxpayers in our community. Now, if they're going to put into this particular event or this gala that's going to happen, what happens and how they benefit. And I know I've heard you say that the city of Boston will benefit, but there's times that it actually hasn't happened over here. So I'm just wondering, can you basically kind of maybe let me know, maybe some of the residents that are probably here from the Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan areas in the inner city, what happens for these folks?
Great question. So I think there are a few answers. I think one is the economic impact to the entire city. As you said, lifting rising tides lift all boats. Each of the United States Olympics had both temporary construction jobs and permanent jobs, thousands of those, which we would expect to occur, in billions of dollars of economic impact to the city, better tourism, et cetera. I know that there are some who are studying this, and I think there'll be reports out later about what expected impacts are for Boston, but that's the order of magnitude we're talking about. I still think, too, there's opportunities for small businesses. One thing I think that's also been important in the Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan area that sometimes too often those small businesses have been left out. We've been thinking about, if we win these games, how we can get small businesses involved, not only in the procurement side of the construction, but also just when visitors come to the city. I also think, too, that the legacy question is big for us. Even if we don't win these games, the plans that we have for the city should improve, the property taxes, for example, et cetera. And as Karen mentioned earlier, we really see an opportunity for us both in the next several years, and if we win these games and are able to return a dividend back to the city, that we could be investing in things like youth sports and education. As finally, as David mentioned, certainly for the community of Roxbury, particularly relative to Franklin Park, we think, again, there can be some facility upgrades. Now, granted, it's a little ways away. It's in 2024, but we want to be able to leave the facilities that we use in a better place than we found them. Those are our ideas, sir, and I think we're very open to others that people may have. There's a whole cultural Olympiad that occurs 3 years prior to the Olympics. So London did this great thing where they brought together artists and musicians and storytellers and poets across London. Roxbury is rich in arts and culture, and we would be crazy not to involve the community in our cultural Olympiad as well. So those are, a few ideas that we have, I think, as we think about what this can mean more than just venues, if you will. But thank you for the question.
How you doing? My name is Michael Bonds. I'm a resident of Roxbury, born and raised here. And he pretty much said exactly what I wanted to say, but I'd like to add too that you've already touched on the Franklin Park aspect of it. White Stadium is pretty much untouched. It's a sports venue that's pretty much untouched. It sits there, falling apart. That could be a potential space for athletic events or what have you. And I'd like to know the direct impact that we will have, that these games will have on our city. I love Boston in and of itself, but I'm pretty much, I may be repeating exactly what he said, but, we're concerned about that because it seems like we're always left out. Of course, the athletes will probably become visiting these venues and so on and so forth. These are, sports venues and things of that nature for the kids, but I want to know the direct impact, and I'd like to be involved if that's possible.
Again, thank you very much for your question. One of the things when we think about the Olympic and Paralympic Games is we've approached it from the perspective that let's not put the Olympic and Paralympic Games at the headline of the conversation. Let's put where Boston wants to be in 2030. And it's an important concept, and it's a very, very important distinction. Because the planning efforts itself that you speak about really should be about where the people of Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the mayor of Boston and the governor of Massachusetts wants our community to be in 2030 or 2040. You heard up here this evening that we're focusing on 2030 because in the city of Boston, we sort of are going to be celebrating the 400 years of the birthplace of democracy, according to Bostonians. Other people argue that, okay? And so the idea is, what do we want our city to look like? And what happens when you think at it from that perspective, like Wydett Circle? That is almost 85 acres of land that is the most underutilized 85 acres of land in any urban setting in the United States of America. And you think about the amount of housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, that the city and the community may want in that area. Not up to us, but it's about what the city wants, the mayor wants, the BRA wants in that community. Think about not what transportation's needed for the Olympics. Think of what transportation's needed to run a vibrant city in a vibrant Commonwealth. People think about the idea that we want to put billions of dollars in transportation for the Olympics. That's not accurate. What we really, really want from a transportation point of view is get the core system up and functioning. Red line cars, orange line cars, extending the green line, things that will improve the quality of citizens of our Commonwealth each and every day. If we follow that from a logical point of view and think about where we want to be in 2030, it forces a conversation that rises all tides and brings us all up together. And I think the point we were trying to make tonight with the golf course at Franklin Park and White Stadium, that I've been involved in the conversations here for 5 or 6 years, okay, and we really haven't moved those forward. How do we improve those assets that we currently have right now for the benefit of the community? And let me talk about jobs specifically. When you talk about hosting an Olympic and Paralympic Games, before the games, during the games, and post-games, there will be over 100 to 125,000 jobs between volunteers and newly created jobs. Most of those jobs that I'm speaking about are a lot of service-oriented type of jobs, manufacturing type of jobs, and a lot of healthy middle-class jobs, working people's jobs that create very, very good incomes for people. So my sense is that by talking about this from a strategic point of view, this can be, we feel confident, benefit the entire community. And that's why we're here tonight, to have this sort of thoughtful conversation about, are we going in the right direction? Are people compatible with what we're talking about? And how do we improve upon whether we move the volleyball thing from from the Boston Common, or we do other types of things? But again, I want to thank you for your conversation, because that's exactly the type of issues we want to hit hard on. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Leonard Lee. First, I want to say I'm really proud to see the folks on the panel, because I know John, he's been in this community when it wasn't fashionable to be in this community. But I have a really big concern, and it's really around economic development and housing. You know, I was part of busing, and it really fragmented our city. But what brought it together? I went and played ball in Southie in 1975. I went and played ball in Charlestown in 1976. I went and played ball in Hyde Park. It blended communities together through sports. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity. My mayor talks about all the time about all our neighborhoods get an opportunity to thrive. And when I heard about the Olympics, I said, that's an excellent tool. You can inconvenience me for 30 days, as long as I know after you leave, there's economic development in the communities. My question is really centered around, how can we get deeper into the communities? Dorchester, I don't know if you remember, up in Common Square, the France ambassador said, start telling all the tourists from France not to go to Dorchester. It was in the papers. How did that make a community feel? How can we change that and use this tool not only to give an image and get part of that billion-dollar tourism industry that comes down to the waterfront, comes downtown? How can we get it into the neighborhoods? Because the neighborhoods are rich of history, especially Roxbury, Fort Hill, Dorchester Common Square, Mattapan. I mean, rich history where we can really exploit and talk about true economic development that stays, unlike what happened in Atlanta. And Atlanta was successful in a lot of ways, but if you go back, there's some really blighted areas that was left behind after the Olympics left. And a lot of community leaders, like myself, have made a lot of statements around the Olympics wasn't good for Atlanta. How can we make sure that the Olympics is good for Boston, for Massachusetts, and for the Commonwealth? Because for me, it's not, 2024, it's not about the 30 days. It's about the 31st day, when my grandchildren, or my son, can still live in Common Square, but yet they can get a job there too. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Leonard. Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm going to go on the record as disagreeing with the French ambassador. Is that who it was? All right, well, I've told that to the world now, so it's apparently the French ambassador. Well, I think one way is to say, you know, these are the communities that are going to help host the games, right? So we're going to have a significant portion of of the games located, we hope in Dorchester, we hope in Roxbury, to say that these are neighborhoods that we want people to be exposed to, that we want people to feel welcome to, and we have no doubt that that will occur. So I think whatever whatever rhetoric is out there about a particular neighborhood, we'll just ignore that and say this is a city, an entire city, that's going to welcome the world, as we do already. In terms of the economic development question, as you raised, I think, as John said, again, whether we win or lose, we're prompting that conversation tonight. Where do we want to be as a city in 2030 and beyond? And it's not just about real estate. It's about the jobs and economic development that can occur in other parts of our city and not just downtown, right? I think that, as we go forward, we want to hear from folks on very specific suggestions or thoughts that you might have. What are things that we can do now? And what are things that we can do when the Olympics occur here? Because we've got 9.5 years to plan. I don't think we want to wait that long for the economic development at all. We can't wait that long. We can't wait that long for housing either. And I know the mayor, as you mentioned, is very much focused on that. So it gives us a hard deadline and something to reach for together. But in the meantime, there are steps that we need to take around planning, around job creation, around housing. We think the Olympics is yet another example in a 10 or 15 or 20-year period that allows us to improve on those things. But obviously, there'll be more conversations to come, and I'm happy to chat with you after, too, if you've got some specific thoughts.
I heard a gentleman refer about the garden game, the public garden game. We can use Franklin Field. Still a good thing.
Great.
Thank
We'll
you.
take that. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Charles Cofield, New England Regional Council of Carpenters and lifetime resident here in Boston. I had a couple of concerns about the some of the locations. We talked about using the Boston Commons. Just like my brother was saying, we have Franklin Field that's available. We have Washington Park that's available. We have Melnea Cass Boulevard with a whole bunch of land that's about to be developed that's available. We talked about using the colleges and the dormitories. For me, what that's doing is that's making those colleges and universities richer. When you can use other venues, plan for housing for the Olympic Games and the Olympic Village, et cetera, that will end up as permanent housing for residents in Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, et cetera. We're talking about making areas in the city a lot richer than they are and not focusing on the areas that really need the help after the games are over. So I think we need to take a closer look at how we may be able to use some of the areas that really need the help for permanent housing after. Businesses that can thrive in the areas. I mean, as far as I know, Roxbury is closer to the center of the city than the Boston Commons. That's why they put that teachers building down there to build the city from the inside out. So Roxbury is the center of the city. So let's focus more on Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and all the other areas that need help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. You made a couple of very good points there. And you're right, Roxbury is closer to the geographic center of the city. First, you asked about how we can use assets in other parts of the city. And I think that we focus too much on the competitive venues, but there's the opportunity and actually the need to use lots of other facilities like Reggie Lewis. The different teams are going to want to use those kinds of facilities for practice. It brings the games into the neighborhoods, and it brings the athletes into the neighborhoods, and it creates the opportunity for some economic input into those kinds of facilities. The housing question, you touched on something that we've been thinking about a lot. The village wants to be a single village, meaning it wants to be all 16,000 athletes, coaches, trainers, all in one place. But UMass Boston doesn't have a need for 16,000 beds. They have a need for somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 beds. So we've been working on a strategy, and it is a strategy. It needs to evolve and develop, and the technology is beginning, but we've got time to develop it, that 10,000 of those beds can be built in a modular fashion. They can be built in a way, and you always got to keep in mind that approximately 2.5 beds, 3 beds is equal to an apartment. So when we say 10,000 beds, that's something like 3,200 to 3,500 apartments. So if we could figure out the way, and we've got a lot of smart people in Boston to figure this out, including the carpenters, how to get from modular housing that we build at Columbia Point, take it apart after the games, rebuild it, not in 3,200 apartments in one place, but 100 apartments, 150 apartments, 200 apartments in different parts of the city where it's welcome, where it's needed, where it's wanted, maybe on city-owned land, where it can be affordable, where it can be workforce housing, and really have a ripple effect that the games, when the games are over at the end of August, they're not really over, that the impact then travels into the neighborhoods, and we do get some housing, not just in the downtown, but in the neighborhoods as well. That's going to take a lot of thought. It's going to take engineering. It's going to take some innovative thought. It's going to take the help of your folks, all of your colleagues, to really pull that off. But that's what Boston can do, because we do have a lot of intellectual capital, and we've got a lot of will, and we can do things that haven't been done before around the Olympic Games. So I love your thoughts. They're good suggestions.
Thank you. And after these next few questions, we'll be calling out groups 3 and 4. So thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. But go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Benjamin Jackson. I'm a resident of Roxbury, lifelong. I heard a lot of words, a whole lot of sounds. I didn't really hear a whole lot of great significance, though. I heard a lot of indirect speech. Felt good, but I'm not looking for you to stroke my emotions and make me feel good. I want facts. I want something concrete. I want something that I can do something constructive with, right? So when you talk about X amount of quote-unquote jobs, and you gave a solid number, but you said some of these jobs would be paying jobs. Some of these, quote, jobs would be volunteer jobs, which means they're not real jobs. They're just tasks performed by people that are not being paid, right? And when you say something like they're good paying jobs, relative to what? What do you mean by good? When you say middle class, how do you define that? I'm hearing a lot of empty speech. Sounds good if what I'm looking for is something to make me feel good, but I'm not looking for that. So, are you really interested in giving the communities, quote unquote, something that they can use and build upon and have something that's long lasting, that's beneficial to us? Or are you just here to say a whole bunch of stuff that sounds nice so that we can help your cause along? Because I've heard nothing that's solid from anybody up there.
So let me be clear.
Please do that.
We can make no promises.
I'm not looking for promises.
No
I'm looking
promises.
for solid statements, not rhetoric, sir.
We, our hope is to win the games, and we will know in 2017.
I'm not talking about winning games. We're talking about building and changing the city. And we're talking about altering communities. We're talking about spending money and putting people to work. And
Absolutely.
also, if you're talking about spending money and bringing these jobs, what you're also talking about is changing the demographic of the city, which means if you're going to bring all of these people in, we're talking about tourists from all over the world, right? That's more than just an infrastructure issue. That's a whole lot more than the T. That's been in the news a lot. I get it. It feels really good, but I'm not looking for that. What happens to property value? What happens to people who you talk about, the people that you're trying to appeal to, people like me, you talk about good middle-class jobs? What happens when the cost of living gets to be a little bit high? And you haven't even given us a solid figure on how many of these jobs are actually paying jobs. How many are volunteering? We don't know. I think you know. How about you make a clear statement, please, sir?
Sure. So we don't know. As I said, I think what we're working on now is to deliver that kind of economic development happens if we win the games. And even if it doesn't, I think as we've said that what we hope to do is to leave the city in a better place to talk about the kinds of investments that it wants to make across Boston and beyond. But I can't sit here today and tell you exactly that there are going to be 4,000 jobs or 10,000 jobs or 50,000 paying jobs. I can't.
Right.
That would be irresponsible for me to say that.
It would be.
But I think as we displayed earlier, there was a slide up that showed what other cities had for experiences, and that is in the tens of thousands, both construction jobs and permanent jobs.
Right.
But it would be irresponsible of me, speaking very frankly, sir, to tell you that specifically this is what is going to happen. But clearly, if we do it right, we work with the city, we believe that the construction that's going to occur, billions of dollars of construction, will absolutely help folks in the trades, and we hope bring new people into the trades. We'll work with the trades to do that. But I can't guarantee a particular job number. I just can't. It would be irresponsible. So
That makes sense. I have a question, though. While we're talking about jobs, specifically construction jobs, do you think that you'd be able to make a commitment to have these jobs be prevailing wage jobs, preferably union jobs, so that we can make sure that the people that you want to assist have health insurance and proper benefits and an actual competitive wage? Can we do that? Or is that irresponsible too?
I think we've already made that statement. It would be our intent.
Intent.
There's nothing in writing right now, but again, we're the largest, my company is the largest employer of union people in the entire Commonwealth right now. And I have a strong support of the unions, especially the carpenters union. So it would be hopefully my intent to encourage everybody, the decision makers, to go with union to build these particular facilities. Let me say one other thing from a personal point of view, if you don't mind, and I just want to thank you for your comments, because I think you're addressing us in a very, very direct way. You want answers. You want to understand why. You don't want it to be sort of feeding you a lot of bull. I think is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement.
And so I would say to you is one of the reasons why I'm doing this personally is chairing the 2024, Boston 2024, is because of the reasons, the questions you're asking right now. My office is in Roxbury, right down the street. You're probably well aware of that. I've been here now for 25 years. I believe in this community. I tell people proudly when I travel nationally and internationally, my office is not in Boston, my office is in Roxbury. And I believe deeply in this community, and I believe the richness of this community. And I believe that the Olympics, and the power of the Olympics, the power of sport, can transform our community more so than any other environment in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Because the gentleman was right. Roxbury is the center of Boston. Roxbury is the heart of our community. And we have a responsibility of doing everything we possibly can to ensure the vibrancy and the health of that heart. In my sense, as the chair of this particular group, I will do everything I possibly can to ensure that our community gets treated the way it should be treated. My company, just for clarity purposes, is not going to be involved in any economic gain for these Olympics whatsoever. We will not build anything. We will not be involved in anything. What I want is I want this for the future. I want this for the next generation, your children and your grandchildren, because I feel confident, as well as ladies and gentlemen around this table with me, that we can make this difference if we collaborate together collectively and work with a vision for 2030 or 2040. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you say make a difference, can you define that? What do you mean? Like,
What I mean by
I don't mean to sound like I'm being
no,
combative.
what I mean specifically by making a difference of investing back into the community. Okay, and I have a record of doing that. I've got a program right now called Boston Scholar Athletic Program that takes high school kids in these academic zones. Over 4,000 kids a year get involved in that. Okay, that's all work, privately raised funds. We have over 44 people employed that deal with over 4,000 kids. We have over almost 200 tutors in the zones in the public high schools right now, all organized and developed as a nonprofit to serve the benefits of the community.
You do realize that by telling me what you have done and what you're doing with your organization, that doesn't answer my question about what change you said that. This is what I mean. Like, I'm familiar with that.
You know, I appreciate,
You're bothering me
I
now.
appreciate your questions. We don't have the specific answers at this particular juncture. What we're talking about this evening is a vision of what we think we can accomplish by people working together and stating exactly what they want this community to look like in the next 20 or 30 years.
Right.
Okay? We're the beginning of that conversation.
Okay.
Proof of concept, that's been used tonight. And I appreciate where you're coming from, but we don't have specific answers, and I don't think it'd be I think, appropriate for us to give you specific responses to those questions you're asking right now.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. So I heard you talk about Reggie Lewis. I am the director of the Reggie Lewis Center at Roxbury Community College, so that was good timing. John, I do want to say that vision that the Massachusetts State Track Coaches Association to build a center that you built is really, I'm someone that has lived the sports, the Ripley effect of sports, being a former athlete myself, traveling to 13 different countries and probably about 40 different states competing. And I'm the administrator at the Reggie Lewis Center, which annually we host. This weekend we're hosting USA Track and Field Championships. Next year we're hosting the ACC Track and Field Championships. We've hosted the NCAA Track and Field Championships. So I could speak from the standpoint of being a coach of 3 athletes that competed in the Atlanta Olympic trials, knowing the ripple effect and the economic impact of sports on communities. I saw the transformation that Atlanta took place. I went there as an athlete during the twilight of my career and saw the difference, even to this day. So I'm well much in support of the Boston 2024. I do think that Boston is the right place for it, and was just happy to hear Reggie Lewis being mentioned, because I do think that we're an example of what sports can do and have a lasting impact on it. And not to particularly, give John any credit, but Suffolk did build the Reggie Lewis Center, and great job, and the community is benefiting from that now. So, thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello, good evening. My name is Nia Evans, and I'm with the Boston NAACP. And if it's okay, I'd like to ask 2 questions tonight. So one common theme or common concern that we've heard tonight is whether or not certain communities, particularly Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, will share in the potential economic prosperity that may come from planning and hosting the Olympic Games. To pinpoint it a little more concretely, when talking about the economic impact report that you're working on right now, will you take pains to ensure that included in that economic impact report is an understanding that, as it is right now, different communities in Boston are starting from different places? So it's one thing to talk about the economic impact of Boston as a whole. It's another thing to talk about what the economic impact would be on Roxbury, what the economic impact would be on Dorchester, Mattapan, et cetera. For example, we learned from speaking with a professor at Georgia State University that 2 neighborhoods in Atlanta received 75% of the redevelopment money that went into planning the Olympics. There are definitely more than 2 neighborhoods in Atlanta. So that's my first question, is in that economic impact report, can we not only see what the economic impact would be on Boston as a whole, but also on particular solid communities that we know have their own unique characteristics?
So let me clarify, we're not doing an economic impact analysis. We know that others are doing that.
Okay.
But your point is well taken, which is how do we ensure that the communities across the city are benefited? And I would just say this, I think one other idea, again, it's an idea that we've kicked around, is to look at 2 things. One is what the convention center did when the convention center was initially built back in 1999 to put requirements in place to ensure that all neighborhoods are benefiting from hiring in particular and the economic impact. And 2, most recently, when I was transportation secretary, we signed an agreement with the CDC in Somerville to make sure that residents of the impacted communities, Somerville, Cambridge, and Medford, on the Green Line extension, received a certain number of trades positions. I think those are the kinds of things, again, that are in our vision. Again, we're 9.5 years away and 2.5 years away from knowing whether we've won, but that's the kinds of things we're thinking about. And obviously, I think Michael's coming to see me next week, Michael Curry. So that's on our agenda. You know, we want the NAACP and others to help us think about, you know, the appropriate ways to ensure that the example you used in Georgia, you know, doesn't happen here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
My second question is, at the February 5th city community meeting, we asked about the structure of your organization and about what steps you're taking to diversify, your paid staff. Where are you in that process? And can you give us a timeline? And can you give us an idea of how you've progressed from that point?
Sure. So it's much easier to keep track of a small organization than the Mass Department of Transportation when there were 10,000 people. So since we last spoke, I've hired 3 people.
Okay.
All are women. 1 is African American, 2 are Caucasian. I expect that in terms of staffing up, we're probably only going to hire and have a full-time staff of 20 to 25. But we have been thinking about how we can ensure that the staff reflect the community that we serve. And so, again, happy to have some conversations with Michael about that. But just on expectations, it's not going to be a big team, but we certainly want it to reflect the community that we serve.
Okay. And just a quick follow-up question, just to make sure I have the numbers right. So you are now at 9 people?
9 or 10.
9 or 10, and you expect to
Probably
eventually
double.
hire 25 people. And I have a question about your process. Is this an informal process in which you're hiring people, or is this a formal process? Are there job descriptions? Are they public, et cetera?
So it's both. We're drafting some job descriptions now for some key positions that we're looking for, a CFO, for example, a volunteer coordinator. It will probably become more formal at this point, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi. My name's Mary Ann Nelson. I live in Roxbury, and I'm really concerned that these Olympics be as green as possible. I'm all for sustainability. However, I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I'll talk about that another opportunity. I did want to, since we're in Roxbury, I was curious about a couple of things. One is, we have 2.5 years before they make a decision. What is the committee doing between now and then to make sure that Roxbury businesses and people are involved in the process, in addition to attending meetings? You're going to buy things, like see all these printed things? Did you try to get a printer in Roxbury to print them? What about the consultants who did these reports? Did you try to get minority consultants to do these? I think you need to really do something now so that if for some reason we don't get the Olympics, there is a lasting impact already. That's the most important thing. However, I'm really confident that we're going to get these Olympics because I know several people who have worked in Olympics in other countries, and they're all really excited about coming to Boston. So if the staff that works at Olympics or international sporting events want to come to Boston, it's just a matter of time before everybody else shows up. So that's why we have to do the best we can right now, starting now. So that's why I'm thinking we need to, Boston 2024 needs to present the community a plan about how to get us involved right now, people making money, not volunteering, and getting it done. Of course, there'll be employment jobs in the future, but that needs to, construction jobs, but you need to lay that out. Now, on the environmental side, I'm looking at this where you're proposing to put the main stadium. Yes. It's just a few blocks from a level 4 biolab, which handles the most dangerous substances in the world. So it looks like if I was going to, you need to start thinking about security and how do you keep this secure. Now,
front desk, Tyrone to the front desk.
I did have some questions about the Franklin Park. This is a really great facility. How long will the park not be usable by residents in order to do this and afterwards? And then I see that you have modern pentathlon and equestrian activities here. How are you going to make these sports understandable to people who live adjacent to the park? Now, probably what you're going to do, not you, but what the FBI is going to do is they're going to lock down the whole park so nobody can get in and out for security purposes. But in the interim, you know, how do kids find out about horses? Since the city of Boston has gotten rid of their horse patrol, I think. And then we see the modern pentathlon is 5 different events, one of which is shooting, which we don't have a really good record with shooting in this community. So I think we need to think about, you know, is this really something we want to have in Roxbury? Or what can we do? The other event is fencing, which there isn't, you know, how are you going to expose youth at Roxbury and Dorchester to fencing? All the 5 events in this activity, which is pretty significant. So I want to know how long is it going to be, and the third thing is both for here and the Boston Common, if the Boston Common is the site of the beach volleyball, how do you plan to assure the community that there's funds available to restore these areas after you finish the events? And will you have money in account before the events take place or after? And you want to respond to any of that right now?
First of all great questions. I'll respond to maybe some, and maybe ask David to respond to a couple of this. First, you raise an amazing point about exposing children to, I would say, sports that they may not necessarily be exposed to normally across the city and frankly across the state. I love that idea, and I can promise you that if we win the games and if we're fortunate to host the modern pentathlon and equestrian events at in Roxbury and Franklin Park, we'll make sure that that's part of our program, and we'll work with places like where we are tonight. I think it's phenomenal. Someone gave us advice that we should all take up an Olympic sport that we're not familiar with, and by all meaning all of us who are involved, to have a sense for how difficult it is for athletes and how really amazing the athletes are. So I love that idea, and I can assure you we'll do that. On the question of availability, I'll let maybe David talk a little bit about that and security. That's still in the early stages, so we don't know what the Secret Service would or would not require. We have a sense of what we would need from a field of play. And then let me briefly just touch on, you mentioned the sort of security concerns at the bio center over in BU. We have had conversations with folks looking at our facility. There are definitely going to be things we're going to need to do to ensure the security for our residents, for the citizens, for the visitors. We would have to work with the biolab to make sure that that was even a more secure facility. As I understand it, it's a very secure facility, but certainly there would be more detailed security plans we would have to have for that particular venue. But I can tell you, I know that that's something that the United States Olympic Committee knew, and we've talked to them about since when our bid was considered. But David, do you want to mention a little bit about the planning?
Sure. And you point out there's some exotic events in the modern pentathlon, like fencing, but there's also running and swimming and the equestrian events you point out, which gives us the opportunity to think about legacy and about community facilities that last after the games. The way we have thought about the cross-country equestrian, it probably has an impact, and I can't tell you with absolute certainty yet because we haven't gotten that far into the planning, but it will have an impact on the golf course. We will not take any part of the zoo. We won't take any part of what's called the forest. We'll only have impact on the golf course and White Stadium. And the golf course, in fact, could be impacted for something like 6 months, which would impact a significant part of a single golfing season. But we haven't firmly determined that yet. And we know it's a valuable resource to the community. And so it may be that there's ways to think about partial impact, that you don't take, you know, all 18 holes, and we can think about it that way.
And can you just say what your plan is now to keep people employed during this development phase, since we might end this in 2017?
Sure. So again, you mentioned about the consultants and whatnot. Much to the chagrin of many of our consultants, they are giving us free services right now, and you know, we've been clear that we expect that to continue. Frankly, David Manfredi, who sits before you tonight, has donated all of his time for free, and it's been significant. We are trying to, frankly, limit our expenses because we don't know if we're gonna win, to be frank. With that said, your point's well taken. If we are gonna be spending dollars, we will look to, in the short term, find ways to make sure that we spread that around. I don't know where we got this printed, for example, but it's a good point. And in terms of employment, as I said, I think we're only gonna staff up to a team of 20-25. It's not a lot of folks. But as we mentioned earlier, we hope that the conversation we're having, the city planning and conversations, even if we don't win the Olympics, I know the mayor has been very focused on this, that this is, you know, opportunity to think about where we want to be as a community in 2030 and beyond. So I would hope, I think John would agree, that the construction jobs that would occur in the so-called Midtown area and other parts of the city would happen anyways, even if we don't win the Olympics.
I did hear that once the Olympics show up, the international corporations come in and take over everything, so that the likelihood of small businesses or local businesses getting involved, making money during the Olympics might decrease. I don't know if this is true or not, but it'd be good to someone to investigate and report back, because I've been looking on some of the websites about the Brazilian games, and it seems like there's some big multinationals involved in that. So I think that's something that we need to know. If we think we can make money and it turns out that Visa and Coca-Cola is going to control everything, along with NBC, then we don't really have much to do here.
Thank you.
I have two, say, clarifying questions about definitions, and then one more yes or no question, kind of yes or no question. The first is on the definition of public funds. So over time, the no public funds pledge has been narrowed, since it was originally just no public funds, and then acknowledged that there would be public funds necessary for security, since you are using the federal government, but mostly the municipal funds, but it's still taking taxpayer dollars from the US government, just from things that could have been elsewhere. My question is on the definition of public funds. If saying no public funds, does that include no, say, tax incentives for the construction of stadiums, a rejection of no taking land for free from the city, or other things that are taking taxpayer dollars but aren't, let's say, being handed a pot of money? My second question is the definition of quote-unquote workforce housing that's been used here at other times. That's not a term that one hears very often. Insofar as one does, it sounds evocative of company towns from a century ago. And even in its use, it seems like it's defining people solely as employees rather than members of communities in their housing needs. My yes or no question goes to the earlier discussion of Suffolk Construction in Roxbury. I have an article from August in the Globe noting Suffolk Construction moving to South Boston. It says Chief Executive John Fish said Tuesday that he is planning construction of a 125,000 square foot building along Harbor Street in the Marine Industrial Park. The new building, for about 450 employees, would allow the company to consolidate its Roxbury and Danvers offices at a single facility. This location speaks to where Boston is going, not where it is today. Fish said Tuesday, we appreciate the vibrancy and overall energy of the Innovation District, and we think it's only going to get stronger. Is that move still planned?
Thank you.
Excuse me, can you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, sorry. Jonathan Cohn, Fenway resident.
Hey, where are you from?
Fenway.
Fenway.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your questions. First, that story about us relocating ourselves over in South Boston, we explored that opportunity and realized that wasn't in the best interest of our company. And we just finalized our lease of land for 99 years next to our corporate headquarters here in Roxbury. We plan on doing a $40 million addition that would be breaking ground once we finish through the BRA process. I would say we'll probably break ground in late spring or early fall of this year. That's what our hope is. So we have probably about 275 employees in the office. We'll probably bring on another, I'd say probably 35 to 50 more employees in the office as well. And we're very, very proud to be here. As you know, we've been here for now almost 27 years, and my sense is hopefully this addition will be here for another 50 years. Time will tell. With respect to the taxpayer funding, it's an excellent question, and I want to be clear about this because a lot of people print specifically what we say. For an example, John Fitzgerald works for the Boston Redevelopment Authority. In theory, John works for the city of Boston, is paid by taxpayer money. So for me to say that there's no taxpayer funding involved would be theoretically incorrect, okay? Our sense is in all of the building venues, the physical construction of the building venues, we are going to do that with private funding. The mayor's been very, very clear that he's not going to mortgage the future of the city to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games. We support that wholeheartedly. They will be planning through the BRA. Taxpayer funding will be needed to assemble the BRA. There'll be land that we may use that cities owns on a temporary basis or a permanent basis. That land would be leased for under typical conditions that the BRA requires or the city of Boston requires. So our intent is not to use taxpayer funding for the operations of the games or anything else associated with the games, as the mayor has pointed out. But there will be conditions that the city will have to be involved under normal circumstance. The term that I use quite frequently is when one thinks of taxpayer funding for the Boston Marathon, there are certain things and conditions that are required to host a marathon. I think those very similar conditions in things, okay, that category of things, would be required to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So that's the sort of the definition that I would use, okay?
Mm-hmm. And then on what the definition of, let's say, workforce housing is?
Workforce housing, it is our intent to collaborate with the Carpenters Union, for example. We've had meetings with Mark Ehrlich of how do we build modular or prefabricated housing in a very, very cost-effective way that we can produce, and then subsequent to the completion of the games themselves, relocate those into different urban settings in a cost-effective way where people that are working in the workforce could afford those. And one of the biggest things we're finding in the city of Boston, I think the average cost of housing in the city of Boston is $366,000 per unit right now. And our hope and goal would be is to produce sort of a type of housing that would be much more cost effective. And as David has pointed out, and Rich has pointed out, the idea we've got some great minds in this community, coupled with some great support from the Carpenters and other union people that can help us do the best we possibly can to provide workforce housing and affordable housing for the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think at this point, if everybody from 1 through 4 can come up, and we'll go to 5 and 6 after these gentlemen ask their question. Thank you.
I'm Steve Jerome. I'm from Charlestown. And world-class cities host Olympics. That's what world-class cities do. And world-class cities also protect their cultural and historic resources. So with that, we have Mr. Rull aboard now. He's very well acquainted with the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Landmarks Commission. They would need to see anything that 2024 would want to do on historic resources like the Boston Common and Franklin Park. Mr. Fish, in due respect, your proposal to dome over White Stadium might have been presented to the Landmarks Commission and to the neighborhood surrounding Franklin Park to consider that interesting proposal, because Franklin Park is a Boston landmark. For those who are skeptical about hosting the Olympics in Boston, as a historian, I would just ask that you consider the long view. If Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had held a referendum on whether Christopher Columbus should sail across the ocean, where do you think we would be now? Back in Genoa and Spain, probably eating pizza and having Chablis. So I just want to say in conclusion that we're very excited about the Olympics. We really want this to happen. We're impressed with Mayor Walsh's leadership in this issue. We would ask that he not be shy about inviting Governor Romney, perhaps, to step in and help us win this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody from groups 5 and 6? How about 7 and 8? Feel free to come up to the podium, or to the microphone. Thank you. Hello.
Mike Stanley from Alston. I'd love to bring the Olympics to Boston. I'm very interested in the transportation innovations and how to improve our bid, both fiscally and sustainably from that perspective. I'd like to see our bid be much better, where we propose innovations that we just don't spend $4 billion on transportation upgrades for maintenance, some buses, some train cars, and adding 4 miles of track to extend a slow green line at a cost of $500 million per mile, right? We need to innovate. We need to challenge ourselves. Because if we don't look at innovative, lower cost transit alternatives, the cost to bring great public transit to places like Roxbury and other communities is just too high. So our current plans do amazingly little to address the core problems that was at the root cause of our snow disaster and economic catastrophe that we all just experienced. There are alternatives that significantly improve the reach, the sustainability, and the financial cost, and there's a responsibility to look at those options. Our transportation bid can be much better. There's a system now being built in Tel Aviv by Israeli Aerospace Industries that's a first of its kind. It will provide fast, reliable, private experiences like having a chauffeured limo on call with emergency priority, yet costs less than a bus ride and will reduce road congestion. It can even be privately funded. Okay, it's possible. Now's the perfect time to start it, and if we build it, they will come to Boston for the Olympics. I'm very willing to talk to folks about how we can make that happen.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Tompkins. I've got 2 questions. The first is about philanthropy or fiscal linkages. I'm curious as to whether or not any of the funds, any of the dollars that we're talking about, or you folks are talking about raising, are going to go to support any social service organizations, particularly in these communities where folks could use that type of assistance. And the second part of that question is, given the price of tickets for the Olympics, will there be a block of tickets, or will there be some sponsor that will set aside tickets principally for kids to enjoy the game at no cost?
Sure, both great questions. I'll take the second question first. The answer is we hope very much to get sponsors to be able to give tickets away to kids. Particularly, I mean, I think the question was asked earlier, you know, exposing kids to sports or activities that they might not have even dreamed of or seen. And so the answer is yes. Our hope would be to do that. I think that occurred in some other venues, particularly in the United States, where sponsors would step up and that we could get kids. And, you know, it doesn't have to be the opening and closing ceremonies. It could easily be, you know, other sports around the city and the state, too. So I think people often see those, you know, jam-packed venues, but there are a lot of other really interesting things that go on that, that we should expose all of our kids to, for sure. What was your first question? I was
about
dodging
fiscal linkages, philanthropy to help some of the social service organizations.
I was dodging until I could remember it, and I didn't, so I apologize. So great question. And I think, you know, as I said, John and I had a chance to visit Los Angeles last week and speak with a woman who's actually a former Olympian and a member of the United States Olympic Committee, who's run the Legacy 84 project for the last 31 years. And LA was able to take the surplus from the games, endow a fund charity that has given about $250 million away to youth sports and education all across Los Angeles. And they're still humming today. I think they told us last year they gave 90 grants out, everywhere from $400 to $2 million to programs all across Los Angeles. You know, I think that would be our charge, is if we can create games that is sustainable, that's a good fiscal model, and that we can, you know, ultimately turn a profit that we could then turn it over to some kind of a legacy organization. I know that's our intent very much. As I said, we've been impressed with what we saw in both Los Angeles and Salt Lake. And when we talk about legacy, it's beyond just those 4 weeks in the summer of 2024. It's the facilities, it's the inspiration, and hopefully it can be funding programs like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Bill Peterson, born and raised in Boston, educated here, and have a small business here. One of the things that's exciting to hear you say is that there's not going to be public funds paying for this, or not a majority of it. But at the same time, that concerns me because that might mean, or leads me to believe, that there won't be public bid construction process going on. And one of the great advantages to public bidding for construction is that we know there's going to be prevailing wage, and there's some government oversight for the construction to make sure that it's done responsibly. Can you speak to whether or not some of it will be publicly bid, or if it's all going to be private construction?
Let me break that down. There's really 2 major facilities. One is the student village, and our intent is to do a public-private partnership. And the reason for that is to encapsulate the risk that the proposal has, because the city should not and will not take that risk. So we intend on doing a design, build, turnkey finance project and lease it back. Now elements of that may change minorly, but our intent would be to build at Union. Okay, it's in the city of Boston with the Boston Building Trades. And secondly, what we'd like to do is to ensure that the risk that's associated with the completion of that is properly indemnified through surety bonds and various other types of insurances. The second one is the Olympic Stadium itself in Widett Circle. We're building a temporary facility there. And our hope and goal is, in the very short term, is to announce sort of a planning process of what that particular site should be, consistent with the vision of the city of Boston. And so all we will be doing there is building a temporary facility, taking that down, and eventually the city deciding what exactly they want to do there in the future. Last one is the IBC, International Broadcasting Unit. That's going to be privately financed as well, and it would be built privately, union built, so there wouldn't be any risk to the city. Most of the balance of the work would be done at the colleges and universities, which would be part of the college universities sort of institutional master plans. It would be financed with the college and universities, not with the city of Boston.
Thank you. Yes, actually, right just before you ask your question, groups 9 and 10 as well, if you'd like to come up, feel free. Thank you. Right ahead.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Grossman. I'm an urban planning student and Cambridge resident. I have 2 questions. One is, can you talk a little bit more about moving from proof of concept design to full development, and how much of that happens before the international decision is made versus just in lead time to construction? And my second question is, how are you thinking about sea level rise and flood vulnerability, particularly at Columbia Point?
I'm going to take them in that order. So this process that we're engaged in tonight has been, as it is ongoing, has been very informative. You've heard lots of comments. You've heard a few comments tonight about specific venues. We've heard comments about specific venues in other of these kinds of formats. The plan will continue to evolve, as I said. It will evolve because of this kind of engagement, primarily because of this kind of engagement, but also just drilling down into each one of these venues, really understanding what the support requirements are, really understanding if they work as we have proposed. And so over the next 10 and a half months, leading up till January of 16, that plan will change. We will test different alternatives. As John said, for every venue, there is at least an alternative, in some cases, more than one. And we will test those. And some of the alternatives may prove out to be better than what our original proposal was. And so you will see that plan change. And we're still in the fact-gathering stage of this, part of that tonight, part of it just being physical planning, as you know, being a student of urban design. And so you'll see that the plan evolve over the next 10 and a half months before we get to our really formal application in January of 16. And then what we've learned is that even after the formal application in 16, historically there have been changes, even up until the actual designation, and in some cases after the designation there's been change. So you know, you're talking about an event that is 9.5 years away, and not everything is completely predictable. Now I've forgotten your second question.
Sea level rise.
Oh, sea level rise. And we've talked about this before. Clearly, it's a very significant issue for the city of Boston. And we've looked at, and you asked specifically about Columbia Point. We've looked at what kind of impact we can have, meaning it may be educational. It may be raising the awareness of the important issues around resiliency, because we are going to touch the harbor in a number of places. We've talked about the Harbor Islands as a possible venue. And the opportunity to, we've even looked at whether, in thinking about the Harbor Islands, can the Olympic Games be a catalyst for studying the islands as part of a bigger plan to create a kind of barrier? But very specifically to Columbia Point, we certainly have an obligation to think, as the city is now thinking about all new development, where are you putting all of the essential resources that are coming into these buildings, so you're making places that will be safe harbors in the event of a catastrophe, which we know is quite possible up and down the East Coast. So we can build housing there that is more than just student housing, that can truly be a safe harbor. And that's the kind of, an earlier question was about sustainability. I think we should think about sustainability, about green, about resiliency as the games being a paradigm of what all development in the city should be.
Thank you. Thank you. And it looks like you are our final question of the night. If there's any other questions, feel free to jump on in. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I have a question and a follow-up. My name's Heather Townsend. I'm from Somerville. And my first question is whether you have approached any of the businesses in Whitehead Circle, and if so, what the negotiation is. And then if they do not wish to relocate, what you would do then.
Yeah, thank you very much. I personally met with the people of Whitehead Circle back, I think it was November 4th. The meeting was scheduled in October, and I met with a woman that apparently represents the different group that's over there right now, and that's probably about 20% of the overall acreage in that particular area. And we mentioned to her at that meeting that we would keep her abreast of any movement as we started this conversation moving forward. And we reported that back to the city. The next steps in that process would be to meet with the city and the BRA and decide how they want to integrate that site into the fabric of that community, specifically Dorchester Ave, the Andrews Square area, down to Broadway, and then potentially down to the South Boston. So the idea is not to just dislocate those particular people. It's to understand what the vision is for that particular site as it relates to the BRA planning process, and then how do we approach them for alternatives if in fact it's determined that they maybe should be located. I think probably the most important point I want to make is that I don't think that Whitehead Circle is going to stay Whitehead Circle in the next 10 years, whether the Olympics come to Boston or not. Whitehead Circle has been discovered now by the BRA in the city of Boston, and they realize that the potential of that particular site for the city of Boston is tremendous. So even if we don't host the Olympics, I would say, from a urban planning point of view, Whitehead Circle will be transformed over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And I think what's happening with the Olympics is we're just starting that conversation early. And I'm not sure how that conversation is going to end, but hopefully will end in the best interest of the city of Boston.
Well, why not let it develop organically instead of, if you say that it's going to be developed anyway, if eminent domain is part of what would make that possible, then that might be the reason for displacing those people. But otherwise, why displace them? Why not build around them?
I appreciate your question. No final decisions have been made as it relates to exactly where our proposed temporary stadium is going to go on that site. We're still in proof of concept right now. I think the city has certain ideas. The community has not weighed in to exactly what their hopes and goals are in the future. And our idea is to partner and collaborate with people in the community. That's exactly what we'd like to do on a going forward basis.
Okay, what kind of guarantee would there be that the development that took place there would involve affordable housing, and how much affordable housing would be offered?
Sure. Again, thank you very much. I think there's a process that all public and private development has to go through in the city of Boston. There's an Article 80 process. There's various different other processes depending where the land's located, whether it be Chapter 91. This, I know, would come under a Article 80 process in the BRA, and I would expect the same rules and regulations to be followed in the development of that site as there would be in any other site in the city of Boston.
So there's actually no advantage to having the Olympics be the cause for it to be developed, because in fact it would be the same amount of affordable housing under Boston rules anyway, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know what the city's vision and the community's vision is for that land. I wouldn't want to be presumptuous. My sense is it's a wonderful opportunity for the city of Boston and the mayor of the city of Boston to sort of outline his vision for the next 15 to 20 to 25 years as it relates to that piece of land and the land around there. I don't think one wants to look at that site as an individual piece. I think we need to look at how does that redevelopment fit into the fabric of that community.
Okay, one more question. How do temporary stadiums work in considering this as a sustainable or green games?
The temporary stadium is a stadium that will be reused after we use it again. It's a stadium right now that we've looked at is from Europe. Okay, it is not like the Boston Garden or like Gillette Stadium. It does not have luxury boxes or various things like that. It's a stadium. It's an open air stadium with 60,000 seats in it. Okay, that would be taken down after and relocated somewhere else for other uses. So we would lease the stadium and give it back to the manufacturers of the stadium themselves for use somewhere else.
I believe there were another 11 temporary structures that were in addition to the main stadium.
Excuse me?
There were 11 other structures, temporary structures, that were mentioned in the bid besides the main stadium. And I'm wondering how that works in terms of building and then tearing down or transporting. How could that possibly be sustainable?
No, my sense is I think when you think about temporary facilities today, the technology innovation where they are today versus where they were maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it's changed quite dramatically. In London, they used quite a few temporary facilities, and those facilities are now being used in other games or in other parts of Europe right today. So my sense is our intent for using temporary facilities is one from a cost-effective point of view, to ensure there are no white elephants, and also to ensure that the community that we're putting these temporary facilities in are restored to the original conditions.
But if you build a white elephant and then take it down, you've still paid for a white elephant. Isn't that right?
No, as I said, these would be temporary facilities that were allowed to be reused at a later date, so these facilities are sustainable. There's nothing that we intend to build. Can I finish, please?
Sure.
There's nothing we intend to build that we're going to tear down and put in a dumpster. That's not our intent by any stretch.
Thank you for time.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. My name is Aaron Jones. I happen to come to the podium from a different point of view. I run a sports-based youth development organization, and I love the fact that you guys are talking about promoting the games through youth sports. However, I'd like us to give some thought to promoting the process through youth sports organizations as well. As the chief of an organization that is here in the community, I'd like to not just expose my kids to the athletic participation part, but I'd also like some exposure to the management and business operations of it. So I'd be really interested in partnering with you to promote the games as well as the process. We have about 700 kids and families, reach of about 5,000 kids throughout Dorchester, Mattapan, and Roxbury. And I'd like us to consider engaging those kids in the business process as well as the athletic process.
Great suggestion. Do you have a business card? We'll make sure we get it before you leave so we can touch base.
I got a few.
A man after my own heart. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Todd Nally. I have some process questions. I would like to have a notion of how you see these monthly meetings playing out between now and September. What will be the format? What kind of timeline are you talking about in terms of discussing issues? Have you figured out what to discuss next month and 2 months from now and 3 months from now? I'm sure a lot of that will be shaped on what you hear from us, but it would be helpful for us, I think, helpful for me anyway, to have a roadmap about what to expect so I can plan my time better and other people can plan their time to see which meetings they want to attend and participate in.
Sure. No, it's a great question. I think one thing we can do, sir, is post an agenda and some information in advance so you see what you'll be walking into. We'll make sure we do that. I think you're right. This has definitely been an iterative process, so we adjusted our presentation tonight to reflect the comments we've heard from folks, which was, you know, be less salesy. I already live in Boston. You don't need to get me to move there. I live there. But you know, I want some more information on transportation and budget. So we also encourage feedback. We're trying to be as responsive because we don't want to waste your time at all. But I think we can post information. I think it will continue to change depending on the feedback we get. And you've also probably seen that we're going to start meeting with folks outside of the city. So I know the woman from Somerville was here, for example. We're going to meet in Somerville. We're going to go to other cities around the state that are not only proposed to host some of the venues, but also other parts of the state that have frankly raised their hand and said, you know what, we want to be involved in some way, shape, or form. So let us post some more information on our website so you can see what you're walking into at these Citizens Advisory. But it is an iterative process because we're trying to be as flexible as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Good evening. My name is Erica Florence. I'm actually the chair of community coordination for the Boston NAACP. And I have a couple of quick questions for you guys. The 2020 candidate procedure in question calls for candidate cities to obtain guarantees for theme number 3, the political and public support. One aim of the theme requires applicants to provide a list of public support. So how do you intend to provide evidence of that support, especially from communities of color?
It's a great question. So I think certainly getting out and informing people like we are now, because I think what I've heard from folks is it's hard to know whether I support or oppose something if I don't even have the information. And so that's really where we are tonight and where we're going to be across the state. I think obviously engaging like the NAACP, as I mentioned with Mr. Curry, I think in a week or two, but engaging community groups as well so we can hear thoughts and concerns and things that we need to be doing to not necessarily solicit support, which we would love, but also to improve our bid and to make sure that we're making the kinds of right decisions. I think we've often said that our bid is only going to get better through community process, and that's our intent. So I don't think, to be honest, I have thought too far ahead of getting those letters of support quite yet. But I think that this process that we're going through will help us gauge and answer questions about who's supporting us and those who have questions, how we can gain their support.
Okay. And that leads to my second question. So has there been any discussion or planning around using local organizations such as the NAACP office as application site for the volunteer and employment opportunities?
I think it's a great idea. I think that's one that we can wait for the meeting with Michael, or we can certainly take your card offline, but I think that's a great idea. I think the other thing we've been thinking about is a natural relationship with youth sports clubs in particular, particularly this summer when kids are going to be flooding places like this. So, but we like that idea. We've had some other community groups who have asked us to come speak or to be available. but I love the volunteer and job idea. We would welcome the NAACP's participation formally in that.
Yes, we would like to have the applications on site. We
Great.
can make the community aware, we can educate them around the process and just make sure
Great.
they know it's even available.
One other point just to make too, so there's sort of a middle ground. We've got, you know, a handful of jobs we're going to hire for. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities, but summer internships is another thing that we're going to be looking at. So for some high school kids and some college kids for this summer, and those will be some paid opportunities as well. We'll definitely want your help as well to help us get some kids, you know, college kids and high school kids involved this summer as well.
Yes, and we have a youth program, the Pipeline of Leadership, so they're all ready for you.
I may have known that when I planted that answer, but yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for coming tonight. Those were some fantastic questions that will surely inform our next conversation. Our public meeting schedule will be on our website. You'll be receiving emails from us about our next Citizens Advisory Group meeting. The mayor will also be having his own public meetings, which I know many of you are aware of, but the next one that he will be having is tomorrow night in South Boston. Thank you so much again for all of your questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon.